We're going to be talking today about our opener for the 2018 Illinois Apprenticeship Expansion Program, Notice of Funding Opportunity, that was just released last week.
Just for housekeeping, maybe before we get started, just want to verify that everyone can still hear us. So I know that we had the phone lines muted, but if you could type in the chat pod to verify you can all hear us. And then we will open up the lines for questions throughout the presentation, and then certainly through the chat pod. So great. Thank you for responding. And Dave, do you have anything you want to add from a housekeeping standpoint for the workNet webinar?
No, I don't believe so. I think we're all set.
Great. And then just so everyone's aware, we are recording this and we'll be posting this on the application website. So those of you who may not have been able to attend will be able to reference your colleagues to the full webinar. So without further ado, Patrick Campbell with the Office of Employment and Training.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the Notice of Funding Opportunity related to the overall kind of program and what we're looking for, and then John's going to take the second half of this webinar and go through pre-award and submission requirements and Grant 101. So I want to start this off with the program purpose. Essentially what has happened with this Notice of Funding Opportunity is that the Apprenticeship Committee for the state of Illinois has determined that a critical next step in the expansion of existing and new apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs is to develop and seek the apprenticeship intermediaries and regional apprenticeship navigators. So these opportunities are federally funded through the Federal Apprenticeship Expansion Grant that the state of Illinois received, as well as state funding that has been incorporated with this to offer maximum flexibility with the program and to meet the needs of what Illinois, or the foundation that Illinois has set up for how we would like to proceed with this. We have a great, we've made some great progress on the apprenticeship program through the talent pipeline grants, which we've had up and running, and through current partnerships, but certainly this is an opportunity for us to expand that further and seek the enhancement and expansion of partnerships for these apprenticeship programs. The next slide is registered apprenticeship industries. And the reason that we have this slide on there is we wanted to point out that although we fundamentally have increased our apprenticeships year by year in the state, as you can see, they are kind of isolated to two categories, the construction and the manufacturing, which are traditional types of apprenticeships. And what we're looking for is to support, expand, and encourage those types of apprenticeships, as well as expanding to new opportunities, thinking outside the box. You can see on here transportation, healthcare, etc. Specifically, Illinois is kind of looking at the healthcare, the TDL, the IT, as well as the manufacturing and other opportunities that are listed on this slide. We will talk a little bit about where you'll see some of the industries that we'll be focusing on in a future slide here. The next slide is registered apprenticeship locations. The reason that we show this slide is because fundamentally, a lot of the expansion has occurred in apprenticeships in the northeast corner of Illinois. And we would like to see this grow, although we do have some expansion in central and southern Illinois. They are primarily in the traditional types of apprenticeships, the trades and construction industry. And we're looking for expansion in the west part of the northwest, the west, and other areas in Illinois, as you can see on here. So we just wanted to kind of point that out and have a focus on that, or a resource for you. Apprenticeship expansion outcomes. Overall, the goal is to build capacity and expand new apprenticeships. The expected outcomes include the following. Increasing the number of apprenticeships. So the number of new registered apprenticeships, we are looking to increase that. The number of individuals and related services. So support services to the participants. How can those be improved? Different ways that they can be provided, and targeted solutions to targeted populations. The number of new or expanding registered apprenticeship programs. So new opportunities, thinking outside the box. Programs in maybe IT, healthcare, some of those things we mentioned earlier. Number of participants in underutilized areas that receive apprenticeship expansion support. So organizations incorporating new partnerships, businesses, colleges, economic development, regions, other organizations. The number of businesses engaged in outreach events and the number of targeted attendees. So getting more people involved, informed about apprenticeship programs, debunking myths, those kind of things are what we're looking for in this, and having some real strategies about how we'll do that in a particular region. Number of apprenticeship sponsors receiving support for those that are doing the actual program. So this is both for actual employers as well as intermediaries, kind of focused on that end of it. The number of industry sector partnerships supported and developed. Obviously, we want to develop these partnerships. This is one way that we see the expansion of these programs. And then the use of innovative and collaborative models. How is your project a demonstration or a pilot? What makes it unique? How have you incorporated ideas from other states? And what kind of success have you had providing these types of services? The next slide is actually the Department of Labor's 5 components of apprenticeships. The first one is business involvement. So a business needs to be included in order to make this a requirement. So we have to have these kind of 5 kind of components in order for the Department of Labor to consider it a registered apprenticeship. The structured on-the-job training is basically work-based. Does somebody have their phone? Can everyone mute their phone? Thank you. Work-based learning is number 2, and then number 3 is related instruction, which is the incorporation of classroom training or education into the work-based learning. Wage gains need to be a critical component in this, so as they attain skills, they continue to increase in their wages. And then I think number 5 is one of the important aspects of this, that it is a nationally recognized credential. Credential they can take most other areas or other states. The next slide is on the Illinois apprenticeship framework. How have we determined, how has the apprenticeship committee determined how the state of Illinois will approach apprenticeships? Please keep in mind that apprenticeships are one avenue towards work-based learning. So the umbrella is career pathways in Illinois. And then under the work-based learning, one opportunity is through apprenticeships. And then we continue to refine that. Let's start at the bottom here. The funding for this opportunity comes from the Federal Apprenticeship USA funds as well as state funds. We are looking for other opportunities for funding. We have some identified down here of other opportunities that we have, but we're looking for in your application other opportunities of braiding additional funds, whether they be from the local area or wherever they might be, private foundations, matching funds through employers. There's a wide variety of opportunities for additional funding. The principles of this, you can see in the orange box there: employer engagement, building on what's working, access and equity, innovation and flexibility, and accountability. So not just, having a theory, but actually following through on that theory and talking about what those deliverables will look like and what they will be. Remember that this funding will cover both registered and non-registered because we are using state funds with this along with the expansion grant funding from Department of Labor. If you'll move to the middle section, you'll see pre-apprenticeship, and primarily the key term for under the pre-apprenticeship is that it needs to lead to an apprenticeship. It's a path to an actual apprenticeship. And under the apprenticeship, you can see we've identified that there's both registered and non-registered apprenticeships listed there. Under infrastructure, funding is our opportunity to support the infrastructure, which is, kind of a key component from the apprenticeship committee. Illinois, the foundation is all set up based on Apprenticeship Plus. And then again, like I said, it all falls, it's one aspect under the career pathway, which we will also talk about. I'm not going to talk too much about this career pathway elements. The first one, what we need. The second one, is it meaningful? The third one, comprehensive. The fourth one, work-based paired with classroom training. The fifth one, point is when it can be or as appropriate, these accelerated opportunities we look for. Credentialing is number 6, and number 7 is, helping somebody focus and specific strategies to get folks into an area of occupation. Again, this is the pinnacle for the Illinois structure, is the career pathway. Next slide is coordination with regional workforce plans. This is really important because the first paragraph addresses where we're looking for this. You can see the map off to the side. You see 10 economic development regions, and in all 10 economic development regions, you'll note they are multi-local workforce area in each of those economic development regions. Clearly, we have spelled it out that we are not looking to fund everything in the northeast corner of Illinois. We want to fund these projects across the state, from southern Illinois to northern Illinois. And we've identified those three categories and how many projects we're looking for in each of those areas. You need to, in your application, identify the economic development region or regions that you're going to work with. You also will need to identify who you're working with from the state, regional economic development, the local workforce areas, and how you're partnering with them. You can see that there is a link on here to the local plans, and I would say you want to refer to the local plans as the LWIA as well as the regional plan, which will identify many of the things that we're asking for, like targeted populations, targeted industries, sectors, and concentrating on what the plan is related to the need within that economic development region. What can you apply for? So, as we talked about, the purpose of this is expanding apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs. How does our apprenticeship committee see that being done? That's being done through two critical options, which are the Regional Apprenticeship Navigator, and we're going to go through and talk a little bit about what that is, and an Apprenticeship Intermediary. There is a third option here, which is the third dot point, and that is a combination. So someone could apply for both the Regional Apprenticeship Navigator as well as an Apprenticeship Intermediary. They could apply for both. The Regional Apprenticeship Navigators, they really focus on business engagement within Illinois economic development regions. The first dot point here is kind of the support of the opportunities. They are developing and strengthening the knowledge, skills, abilities, processes, and resources that businesses, educational institutions, local workforce areas, community partners, they are kind of the gathering of all this information and developing the partnership between these folks and delivering the knowledge, skills, abilities, processes, and resources to them. The Apprenticeship Navigators will develop sector and regional partnerships between, I know it says interested there, but sometimes folks, are unaware. So they're not aware that they would be interested if they were more informed about it and understood and some of the myths were debunked. So I would insert in there as well as interested, unaware parties that may be interested. So, they all have the same common goal in growing the talent pipeline within that economic development region. The third one here is navigators will build relationships with regional employers and ease the access to apprenticeship for business and employees as a lead outreach and technical expert in their assigned geographic region. This includes the introduction of the apprenticeship concept to those unaware.
Okay. So maybe we can just pause there for a second. I saw a couple of just technical issues, and David, with workNet, can you verify that we are still coming through on the audio and any issues that we need to address on the technical side?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. As far as issues, I think I might have a fix for that.
Okay, great. And so I think that one noted that I think if you log in and log out or call back in if you're fading, but hopefully you can all still hear us. Okay.
Okay. So the Regional Apprenticeship Navigator role and function is to establish and build partnerships. And we've identified some of those stakeholders. Again, these are just some that we are aware of, that we've thought through, that we've seen in other states that have worked well with this type of an approach. But that last dot point is really important because there are many other partnerships that can be developed, and that's what we're looking for in this, is for folks to point out who they've been working with, who they can bring to the table that could really have an impact in that economic development region. So this to me is somewhat of the foundation of this navigator. The second dot point is understanding and communicating employers' needs. So we've identified this as the demand. Obviously, without employers, we don't have a demand for this. So we need to have that, and that communication, partnerships with employers within the economic development region, and the facilitation of that is a critical component to the navigator and their role. Understanding and communicating about educational programs and other services available, the supply. So, a lot of folks are still tied into a traditional apprenticeship. They don't understand how it'll work. So educating and bringing people. We can have the demand, and we have a lot of demand for apprenticeships. We are out there talking to employers. We know the demand is out there. The supply, if we don't have the people that want to go into apprenticeships, we're short. So how are you going to deliver that? How are you going to bring that to the table? How do you see best to educate on these programs to individuals that might be interested? And the last dot point on there is developing a consistent message. One of the things that was identified in the apprenticeship committee over and over again has been that there is a consistent message from one end of the state to the other. Folks think about apprenticeships a little differently in the north than maybe they do in the south, or depending on what the location is and how much exposure they've had to non-traditional apprenticeships. So it's an important factor in this whole thing, is that consistent message. And that's what we're looking to the navigators to establish and work with all of their partners, including apprenticeship intermediaries, to establish that consistent message across the board. The characteristics of a regional navigator are they need to be knowledgeable. So the first 3 dot points are on how do you do this. You need to be knowledgeable, successful, and experienced. We want to know, what are your experiences in this? We'd be concerned about someone that this is the first time they've ever done something like this, and they have no history with these first 3 dot points. So we want to know what the experience is, or what kind of information you can provide to us. Successful and experienced. The next one is fosters the development of partnerships. How have you done that? What have you done within the region that you're seeking? And how have you held hands in the past? What we're not looking for here is a research project. We're not looking for folks that just want to test all of this out. There is some degree of testing on this, but we're not looking to fund research on what may or may not be successful. So, important fact when you're considering this. Dot point number 4 is where are you going to do this? The point of contact for the region, within the region, is critical to that consistent message. So you've got to be available to these folks, the intermediaries, the businesses, and all of the other partners. Creative, that's been put first under number 5. So what are you going to do? You're going to be creative. You're going to think of ways that this can bring information, can expand on programs, expand on individuals who know about these programs, and be a great resource. So there's many items under there. Number 6 is who we think could do this. This is not a comprehensive list by any means, but this is who we see having great opportunity to do this. Chambers of commerce, local workforce areas, associations, coalitions, service providers, community-based organizations, community colleges, technical colleges, and then we put on there other entities. So there may be other entities that are very applicable to this. Okay, next slide. The next slide is Navigators Understanding Workforce Challenges. What are the needs? Identifying. We have some challenges listed here. I don't think this is completely comprehensive, and I'm sure you don't either. There are many other needs and challenges that should be clearly articulated. How you, what your thoughts are on those needs, and how you propose to strategically approach those challenges. The next slide is Navigators Speak the Language of Business. Look, we're all salesmen. All of us are. And this is just a good sales strategy. We are just full of government language. If you have read through the NOFO, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. It is full of government language, and it's very difficult for folks to process that. We're required by law to provide it in those terms. We're looking for a navigator to take that information and put it into layman's terms and translate this for folks so they can easily digest it and understand what's being talked about. Again, the sales role of the navigator is going to be a critical component. Don't assume everyone knows about apprenticeships. A lot of people know about apprenticeships, but they have their own thought process on it, and it could be a complete myth. It could be completely wrong about what they're thinking of. Other folks have not even made the connections. So selling those connections is going to be critical. Providing context and details and backing up what you're telling us and why you're telling us, the reasoning for this and your approach to sales is going to help us understand what you're going to do with this. Debunk the myths. I already talked about that. Stakeholders understanding the issues, be present and available. That number 3, debunking the myths, is the only way to expand outside the box, in my opinion. This is a critical component of it. Number 5 is leveraging appropriate resources and determining which elements of the apprenticeship program are needed to be in place. This is a strategic evaluation of what you want to do. And then we learned through, for some of you, I looked at the list who's on the webinar here. Some of you are currently talent pipeline holders, and we've grown the talent pipeline, but it was, very strategic, and it was slow going. It took a lot to build the confidence of employers in the area, and to be honest with you, once some of those intermediaries who we currently have established that, the need was overwhelming, and I think they can attest to that. So I guess, keep at it. The talent pipeline is proof that it works well. The 2 last dot points kind of go together. Now we're moving on to the apprenticeship intermediaries. I want to say that one of the things that John and I talked about and we thought about as we were talking about this is that we have intermediaries that already exist out there. So one thing that I thought would be a helpful resource is if we posted the project summaries for some of the current and past talent pipelines on an FAQ page, or posted it on the resource page, what some of those project summaries look like. Because there are really great examples of how an intermediary has developed and what they're doing with it, and the great successes that they've been able to implement. But we have the language here. The first dot point pretty much talks about how do you do this. An organization can help broker local, regional, and national workforce solutions by convening employers and community partners to determine workforce trends. There is a word down there, and assisting in the blending customized services and seed funding to grow the demand for new apprenticeship programs. So by seed we mean connecting the resources for the funding, but we also mean that funding will be available in this notice of funding opportunity to intermediaries, but it is not arbitrary funding. So it wouldn't be we would just list a dollar amount that you have to create these projects. You need to identify these projects that you want to fund in your application and clearly articulate what those are. So we're not interested in giving a pot of money for someone to sit on till they can create a project. We want that project to be identified up front. And as you move through the process, we realize there will be new opportunities for the intermediary, and there will be options for connecting to resources and additional funding for that. Who can do this? Examples of apprenticeship intermediaries include industry associations, institutions of higher learning, CBOs, chambers of commerce, local workforce areas, and community service organizations. Industry intermediaries usually specialize in specific sector, but some may possess expertise that cuts across more than one market. And when you think about that, one suggestion that I can make is you look at transferable skills from one industry to the next. That might be a great opportunity to cut across several industries, and taking a look at that. Roles of apprenticeship intermediaries. They often serve as a sponsor for apprenticeship programs and activities, but they're not necessarily limited. As you recall when we talked about it, it doesn't have to be a registered apprenticeship. When we say that, it's more in the realm of work-based learning and a marriage between work-based learning and potentially classroom training. And pulling those two together, or some type of training that is coordinated with that work-based learning. The intermediary's role is to support the registration of new programs with the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Apprenticeship, sharing or utilizing resources from community colleges or other organizations for process acceleration that helps stakeholders rapidly embrace programs. I can tell you that some of the current intermediaries that have been most successful in incorporating apprenticeships, their success is a direct result of simplifying the process for employers. So that is a critical component. Identifying champions and coaches, I think that having the appropriate number of journeymen, having the appropriate number of, if you want to call them mentors, working through all of that process is important. The third one in here, just to back up, aggregating the needs of small employers with an industry. This is really an important focus. We know that a huge percentage of the overall employers, which is the demand in Illinois, are from small employers. The large employers get all the attention, a lot of funding, and et cetera, et cetera. They have opportunities for multiple apprenticeships, but I think the opportunities are much stronger with small business, or at least as strong with small business, given that we have 90+% of all employers are small business in the state of Illinois. Identifying the champions we already talked about, providing informational sessions on available or soon-to-be available programs. This last dot point is, on this page, is the partnership between the Regional Navigators. So they're going to use the support from the Regional Navigators, particularly for this dot point number 5. The role of the continued role of the apprenticeship intermediaries is targeting underrepresented populations and creating a plan for outreach, wraparound support services and accommodations, managing registered apprenticeship programs, developing the program design and coordinating the program activities, including the recruitment, assessment, case management, related technical training, work-based training, supportive service and placement of participants, facilitating the participation of employers, supporting the development and expansion of apprenticeship programs in non-traditional industries, very important, and identifying funding and resources to support demonstration projects. This notice of funding opportunity will fund adults, dislocated workers, and incumbent workers. So that's important when you're looking at this. Now, I know that throughout the NOFO it did identify some youth, but I think John's going to talk about how that's applicable to this, and we are talking though about participants involved under the WIOA will be adults, dislocated worker, and incumbent worker. I think I'd like to move on to the partnerships. Partnerships are so important. If you are not a provider within a local workforce area or a local workforce area, you don't really have access to the Illinois Workforce Development System. And that's a critical system that you have to have access to. So therefore, that's why in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, we require a partnership with a local workforce area, at least one local workforce area. So you need to have that component in this. But these partnerships, I'll just touch on each of these, are so important. You have to have that partnership with business. You have to have it with labor. You have to have the partnership. You could be labor. You could be one of these entities as the applicant, but you need to spell out and articulate in the grant how you're going to, or how you have fostered these partnerships. We need to know that. We need to see that. Without that information, none of this grant opportunity is slated to an island, to an individual who is going to do all of this themselves. If you are the applicant for this grant, you need to identify all of the partners that we're looking for. That would be training institutions if you're not the applicant as a training institution.
Right. Pat, maybe I would just pause there for a second. So I think the part of the presentation that we just completed is to give like kind of the high-level model, again, high emphasis around the Navigator and the Intermediary. The next series of slides is going to focus on the key requirements for intermediary projects. So again, one of the things that Pat mentioned that this funding opportunity will support are demonstration projects. And as he mentioned, the demonstration projects have to serve WIOA eligible adults, dislocated workers, or incumbent workers. And so the next series of slides are going to really highlight those key elements that are required for all of our demonstration projects.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I think that this slide says it all. I mentioned, you know, you need to identify who your partners are and how you've worked with them. And to support that or to verify that that has occurred, that's what the MOUs are doing. You know, some of the early on failures that we learned under the Talent Pipeline Grant were a direct result of poor or lacking MOUs that did not clearly articulate what the deliverables were, what the expectations of the partnership were, and so it kind of caved in on itself in the early parts of the talent pipeline process or our early demonstration pilot projects. So the MOU is really critical. You know, we've got some resources available for MOUs, and those will be out there. I know every time we do bidders conferences on talent pipeline, we get lots of questions about you know, how do I do an MOU or what's necessary in that, et cetera. So we will have that. I think this slide speaks for itself. The Memorandum of Understanding needs to be a part of this project. Okay, the WIO performance, obviously projects that provide services to WIOA, the performance measures established within that local workforce area should be taken into account. We have an Appendix C in the Notice of Funding Opportunity that you can refer to for additional information on that. The negotiated performance measures unique to each local workforce area are applicable to all participants served under this Notice of Funding Opportunity and are listed in Appendix D. When the grantee is not an LWIA, WIOA performance measures and targets will be determined by the state. So during the negotiation process, we will be talking about that, but you should be familiar with what those performance under WIOA are, the measures are, and be ready to address those issues. The priority populations, you know, I would refer for our priority populations and our targeted industries to several resources that we have identified. That would be the Unified State Plan, that would be the regional plan and local plans, local workforce area plans, to help you identify individuals with barriers, minorities, women, vets, etc., etc. So projects must be focused on serving the targeted populations identified in the Unified State Plan, which we, as I said, have the resource available, the link for that resource available to you. In addition, we have two links here for the targeted industries and occupations. So it's not just the population to be served, but what's necessary, what's been identified necessary within that regional economic development area as as seen by the local workforce area, the state unified plan, and the information that can be found on these two links of which industries and sectors you should be discussing. The next slide is reporting requirements. For incumbent workers, it'll be going through the Illinois WorkNet workforce tracking system, the GRS monthly cost reporting, and there will be quarterly reports. I think we said those are done either manually or online, the quarterly reports for that, identifying those. For adult dislocated workers, the WIOA participants, and really incumbent workers are also WIOA participants, at least they're funded under that resource. But in any event, those two categories, the adults and dislocated workers, you'll need access to the Illinois Workforce Development System, the GRS again, and then the manual or online quarterly reports. So we're repeating this again for everyone. We've identified two specific structures that are components of this notice of funding opportunity and how it's divided out to expand on programs and applicants under the apprenticeship program. Those are apprenticeship intermediaries and regional apprenticeship navigators. Again, we wanted to emphasize that you can apply to be both. You can be both a navigator and an intermediary. That's a big challenge, though. I just want to say that because there is a lot involved with those two. An intermediary needs to be very focused on, working with those businesses and the actual mechanics of what is occurring with the apprenticeship program. We have multiple bidders conferences and workshops. We've listed them all on here. I won't go through them, but we have them all the way from very southern Illinois in Marion up to all the way north in Rockford. So there should be accessibility to everyone to get to one of these. We are going to approach it. The Bidders Conference will be slightly longer. We're going to go into greater detail, more discussion about the applications of this and other items. But it'll be longer. John will, but it'll be in the same format that we're kind of doing here, where the upfront part will be the program, the back end part will be the application and that kind of stuff. We have a number of apprenticeship tools. I highly recommend that you look at these. We have gone through all of these, and we've pulled a lot of information from these resources and incorporated those into the notice of funding opportunities. So with that, John, I think we can turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pat. So what I'd like to maybe suggest we do now is, Pat laid out the model that the Apprenticeship Committee is focusing on funding along with our state partners, and maybe we can unmute the phone lines and we can address some of the questions regarding the model. Maybe we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes of those questions just so we don't run out of time for the technical pieces. I will go through all the technical pieces, so grab another cup of coffee. You'll need that as we get started. So again, and I'm going to try to go back into the chat pod. So David, if you wouldn't mind unmuting the phones and those, if you have a question on the phone, maybe start there.
Phones are unmuted.
Great. Anybody want to chime in with any initial questions as we get through the chat here?
Yeah, hi, this is Panos with Moraine Valley. Can we have a couple of examples of not registered apprenticeships?
Sure. A non-registered apprenticeship, you know, some companies might not be prepared to start a registered apprenticeship, and so they have. If you're familiar with are you familiar with on-the-job training?
The concept, or is there an initiative? The concept, yeah.
Actual on-the-job training and how that works. The actual on-the-job training, a coupling of some kind of training through Moraine Valley or whoever it might be, coupled with the on-the-job training, or it could just be work-based learning, just on-the-job training for a dislocated worker coming into a company. Maybe they're not ready to expand it to an apprenticeship, which is, a process that they need to go through. We also have companies that have their own apprenticeship that is not registered through the Department of Labor. That would be an example of other opportunities. And we will post out on the resource or FAQs some project summaries that will give you some good ideas. Although some of those are apprenticeship, many of them are not actual apprenticeship, where they have just tied in training and work-based learning together.
Right.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So another question in the chat pod is, I think, around the role of navigators and what organizations can be navigators. And I think that the list that was provided in the slide included educational entities, employers and associations, public entities, community-based organizations, and others. And so that list certainly isn't exhaustive. So if you can fit, or if you can, if it's a good fit to meet the requirements that are outlined in the functions and provide those services, I think the idea of this initial NOFO is to be more inclusive, but the key is that you have to be able to provide those services and focus on the outcomes. Another question is, do the navigators and intermediaries need to participate or a requirement to link with the local workforce boards? And so certainly on the intermediaries, if they are running demonstration projects, that is one of the key pieces that we know that running demonstration projects with eligible participants, so those adults, dislocated workers, or incumbent workers, there are a number of systems that PAC talked about as far as reporting activities and outcomes, and having the ability and the expertise of documenting eligibility. And so absolutely, that is one of the key pieces that is required to partner up with a qualified organization, if that's a local workforce area or a provider.
Yeah, I think, that was on the slide where we talked about MOUs as a must. So, they will be one of your required partners if you're not a provider within a local workforce area. And some of you from down south may not be familiar with that, but up in Cook County, many organizations up here are actual providers within the local workforce area and have access to the workforce development system.
Yeah. So another question is wondering if the program could potentially provide funding directly to a company for for a project. It's possible. However, the primary focus of this NOFO is to support intermediaries and navigators. So it isn't, and again, I think one of the challenges of directly funding grants with companies, as you will see as we get into the technical components, that there are a lot of.
What's that question again? Because that's not what I heard.
So the question is, can the program provide funding directly to an employer that wants to start an apprenticeship program?
Through an intermediary.
Right.
So this grant would not fund directly to a company. So if you are a company, you need to establish a partnership with an intermediary or someone that's going, and they would need to apply for this, and that would be the circle of funding for this. And that project would need to incorporate eligibility for the services under for adults and dislocated worker, or eligibility as incumbent worker, as identified within the notice of funding opportunity. But it would be a pass-through, I think, is the best way to answer that question. So whoever the regional and intermediaries are, it would be more in lines of a pass-through through the grant applicant.
Right. Okay. So some other technical questions. So in cases where a local workforce area is not the grantee, that local workforce area would not be held accountable for that specific activity. But we use those performance measures outlined in Appendix C of the application as a kind of a guideline for what the project should shoot for as far as those WIOA performance metrics. Another question is, again, I think we addressed that as far as for demonstration projects, if you are serving those adult and dislocated worker, incumbent worker, it is the responsibility of the applicant to develop those memorandum of understanding and partnership agreements with organizations, local workforce areas that are qualified to take care of those eligibility determinations and the case management and the tracking throughout. And we can provide some additional details and resources on the website as well. Let's see. So youth are not a focus of this NOFO. It is adults, dislocated workers, and incumbent workers. We understand that under the Illinois apprenticeship framework, that youth is called out specifically, but for the specific demonstration projects that is funded under this NOFO, it is limited to dislocated workers, adults, and incumbent workers.
Let me add on to that just like the talent pipeline and the way it grew and expanded, our intention for this is that these are the pilot, the demonstration projects, but we do look to the future, of expanding this to the youth population and the introduction of apprenticeships and the initiatives set out by our Illinois Apprenticeship Committee towards youth, moving it that way. We just want to be as structured and strategic in this first go-around so we can keep our arms wrapped around this and expand it and grow this as we move forward.
Great. Okay, another question is, would a high school be able to be an intermediary?
Yes.
Okay. And I should also mention that we are recording the webinar, and also will be putting many of these questions on the FAQs just so we can And also, our responses will also be refined there as well. So
the high school question as an intermediary, absolutely. Specifically, though, I would want to articulate and expand on what are your business connections, what kinds of, is the high school specifically geared towards technical, or what sectors are you working with, and where are your folks who graduate going, and how can you kind of expand on how you're pulling all of those groups together and making those connections.
Okay. And then let's see, a couple more questions. So again, I think the question is, how can a high school be an intermediary if the focus is on the adult population? So that would have to be those that are 18 and over that meet the eligibility requirements. That is obviously kind of a key piece of this is, the funding sources are WIOA, okay? Whereas Pat mentioned, we've got a pool of funds from the Apprenticeship USA program, and then we also have our WIOA statewide activity funds. And if we are directly serving individuals and they're determined participants, right, they have to meet the eligibility requirements. And so if you are going to provide that direct services to individuals, they have to meet those requirements, and you would have to be, even though you're serving high schools, you would have to be, targeting, those that meet the adult eligibility requirements.
But you may have some opportunities there. Many high schools offer alternative programs.
Right.
And, for those that maybe have dropped out of school, there may be some, or 18 or older and have dropped out of school, and the alternative programs you have, that might be a great linkage for you to some of the businesses and particularly an introduction into apprenticeship programs. So I can see some real possibility and connections there and opportunities for a high school as well, even though we are focusing right now on adult and dislocated workers.
Okay. And I think last question, and then we'll, hopefully at the end, we'll have additional time for follow-up questions, is what is the eligibility for incumbent workers?
They need to have worked there for 6 months at the company. We will also post our risk analysis on our resource page that we use for the talent pipeline. We are looking for the full-time type of incumbent worker. So, they work there for 6 months, primarily we're looking that they would maintain their current employment status with them or be advanced due to the training. So a lot of times companies are changing over a line, so they might not be advanced, but they could be retained by securing the new type of training, or they would be advanced. And so that sums it up very well.
Yeah. And page 8 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity document includes the definition of incumbent worker training, and we can also post some additional resources on the web page to go into more detail.
Hey, John, this is Pam Furlan. Can I get a clarification on a couple things you said?
Sure.
Okay. You said that if the local workforce area is the grantee, then the performance measures apply. If not the grantee, then whoever is the intermediary, the performance measures are only recommended?
No, they'll be negotiated by the state, and the baseline for that negotiation will be the performance measures that are outlined in Appendix C, which are the ones that are established for the area for this year.
Okay. So then the state's responsible for those?
Correct.
They would go under the whole state.
99?
Like an LE and 90.
That's right.
For 90, okay. And then the other thing you said, the local workforce area is a required partner, but not if you're a provider. What does that mean?
Within, let me use LWIA 7 as an example. They have many, many providers, dozens and dozens of them that are, serve adults or serve particular populations, and they have access to IWDS, and they have a contract with the local workforce area to provide those services. So they already have access to IWDS, and we would allow that type of a situation.
Okay.
Providers don't
I
exist.
understand that. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
And then just so for the whole audience, what we're talking about is located on page 13 of the application, where it kind of talks about that importance of having a qualified partner being able to determine an individual's eligibility under WIOA, and then also make sure that they can provide the case management that Pat mentioned, have access to all the required systems that we have. So I think we're going to now move to the more technical piece of the presentation. And David, if you can help me, I want to just kind of walk through the actual notice of funding opportunity great, thank you. And so hopefully you all can see this. I'm trying to blow it up, so you can. I'm gonna. If you have this document, it would be. You might want to take some notes, because I want to highlight some of the areas that you should take note of. As Patrick mentioned, the document itself is pretty enormous and has many of the requirements that that we're forced to have through the federal and state requirements. Right, that's right. So you can see that this template, if you've worked with state grants before, is similar to other opportunities. We have outlined the purpose of the program, and that was the first part of this NOFO. All of the program, I should note, is kind of governed by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requirements. And so within the NOFO, you'll see that here are some links to those programs and requirements, especially for some of the new folks on the line. The program purpose is outlined, and Pat did a great job of underlying the intermediary focus and the Apprenticeship Navigator focus. So I'm going to quickly go through, through page 6, and want to pause here at page 7, where we are again highlighting the bottom line outcomes that are expected from the program. One piece that we want to emphasize is that this activity should not supplant or replace your existing operations. That's really the key. We want to show, and your proposal should show, kind of the value added of these grant funds. Moving quickly then through the next couple of pages, I think the definition pages can answer some of the key questions around some of eligibility concerns. These are key definitions that are pulled out of the WIOA regulations and our apprenticeship program. So you'll notice those there. You'll note that we did include information on all types of apprenticeships, both pre-apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships, and registered apprenticeships. There is reference to the State Unified Plan moving through. Also, there is reference to the IWIB Apprenticeship Plan, and the Apprenticeship Committee chaired by Mike Conley and really drove this notice of funding opportunity and the priorities that are listed here. And more information is listed here at the Apprenticeship Plus webpage. One of the key pieces for both the intermediaries and the navigators is to support the priorities of the state plan, which also includes the support of industry partnerships. And so one of the expectations is that navigators and intermediaries will work with the state, will be good partners with us, and will participate in these sector development activities. And there's some more information about those initiatives located in the appendix of the Notice of Funding Opportunities. We spoke in the Q&A here about the participant eligibility and case management, also about the WIOA performance, and hopefully this information may fill in some of the blanks for some of you who may not be as familiar with WIOA performance. It's all listed there. Again, looking at employment rate and earnings are some of those key measures of WIOA participant performance. Pat mentioned the targeted populations. Those are listed here. I want to emphasize that, again, we are funding adult, dislocated worker, and incumbent worker participants, and you'll note that target populations within the state plan include youth who are in or have aged out of foster care. So obviously, in the context of this NOFO, we are focusing on those adult, right? So they would have to be 18 and meet the adult eligibility guidelines, but they may have aged out of the foster care system. Again, we looked at the program outcomes, and I'm going to speak to this and really focus on attachment 2 of the NOFO when we get there. But I do want you to make a note of this. These program outcomes are really emphasized throughout Patrick's slides, and also through your technical proposal and a summary on the Appendix 2 of the application. The next part is very technical in nature. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. We'll have some other slides that will get to these technical items. I want to get to the application submission information, okay? So to submit an application, we're asking you to provide us with a whole application package, right? So it includes a signed application cover page, it includes an executive summary, it includes a technical proposal, it includes resumes of key program staff, it includes memorandum of understanding, and it includes the budget proposal. So I want to spend a little bit of time just clarifying some requirements around the technical proposal here on page 18 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You'll note that the technical proposal has a maximum page limit, right? And you'll see that the maximum page limit is 12 to 18 pages. And that really depends on what you're requesting funds for, right? So if you're going to come in, as a navigator alone or an intermediary alone, your maximum is 12 pages. If you're going to provide both of those functions, right, you're going to come in and you want to do the both, you're a navigator and an intermediary, your maximum is 18 pages. So for both components, right, so component 1 is a navigator, the component 2 is an intermediary, you should tell us about yourself as an organization, and that is outlined in the technical proposal section A, right, applicant capacity. Provide documentation of Second piece is the documentation of needs, identifying those targeted industries that Pat talked about. Describe your connection to those industries and how you're going to create those partnerships. Part C of your technical proposal, there's two potential parts, right? So if you're going to come in as an intermediary, you complete the intermediary questions. And it's, we ask all of the nuts and bolts about what you're going to do as an intermediary, and also if you are going to provide a demonstration project, or if the grant will provide and support that, we want you to answer all of those questions that are listed there on page 19. Part 2 for regional navigators, so if you're going to be a navigator only, then you only need to answer the navigator component. If you're going to be a intermediary only, you only need to answer that component. If you're going to do both, you obviously respond to both sets of questions. We have laid this out in kind of a question and answer format. If you'd like to provide your technical proposal in that way, that's absolutely acceptable, and it flows very well. We would encourage you to do that. We wouldn't reject your proposal if you have an alternative format, or if you want to provide the same information in a different way. But again, the key is that you must address all of the questions that are listed here within the technical proposal. And then the last piece of the technical proposal is the cost effectiveness and return on investment. Those are really the key pieces of the application. And as you see, when we go through to the evaluation portion of the NOFO, you will see that there is a direct link or correlation between the components of the technical proposal to the evaluation criteria. So I mentioned other things that you need to provide in your application, right? And your application, remember, is a whole package. So you've got your cover sheet, your executive summary, your technical proposal. Next thing is your implementation plan, which is an attachment 1, and you can use an alternative format as long as it has the minimum requirements that's listed in attachment 1. It's kind of a generic timeline. Number 5 is the activity and outcome summary, and that is really a key piece of information that the evaluators are going to look at, because it shows at a glance what are the bottom line activities and outcomes that you're going to provide or that these grant funds will support. Next piece is, as I mentioned, the resumes of key program staff, memorandum of understanding, and then the budget proposal. We're going to get to some slides that emphasize the submission due dates, which is September 17th, and then also just to move to the next section here, applicant review information. You'll see, again, these are the criteria that we review and the weights for each of the criteria that is included in the review. Also outline the review procedures. And again, emphasizing some of those requirements at the end of the initial part of this is that, these are state grant funds that are federal pass-through, and so we have, our project reporting, we have our monitoring requirements, and that all of the grants will be required to enter into grant awards with that specify your agreement with all of the requirements listed here on page 24. And we'll get to those in a minute here as we go back to the slide deck. So I do want to, that's the kind of a very quick review of the NOFO itself. I want to just highlight some of the resources in the appendix and attachments. This first attachment A is the targeted approach to apprenticeship pulled from the U.S. Department of Labor, and as we look at it, you'll notice many of the graphics and key elements here are included in what we, the apprenticeship, and as a state partner and the apprenticeship committee sees as the key role of the Apprenticeship Navigator. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but again, I just want to kind of scroll through and show that these again are key resources as you look at and try to understand, well, what is it that navigators should be doing, right? I think that these resources in Appendix A provide a good answer to those questions. And, the key pieces here is that Illinois is looking to, localize and customize that, or actually regionalize that, not localize, but, really, fit to the specific needs of the industries in the regions that you're going to be serving. So again, just moving to the, trying to move quickly to the next appendix here. Appendix B is the pathways information that Patrick mentioned. Again, this is a key piece of how apprenticeship is under the umbrella of a career pathways framework. And a lot of great information has been done at the state level with our workforce and education partners to really frame career pathways, and would encourage you to review that information if you're not aware of it, and it's an important context to be operating your program. The next appendix is the model that Patrick went over, and the next is the eligibility requirements. We've spoke about the adults and dislocated worker eligibility requirements, and they're listed here. Another key initiative is the support of sector strategies and the state talent pipeline, and again looking to support initiatives like the U.S. Chamber Talent Pipeline Management Program, and these are some things that we want to connect our navigators and intermediaries into. This next appendix is the performance measures. I think it's not displaying quite perfectly, but I think you get the idea. And then moving to the attachment, which is the project timeline. And this last attachment is really the key, right? Because, again, Section 1 is intended to document services that you're providing to individuals that you're serving under the grant, right? So those participants, adults, dislocated worker, or incumbent workers. And we want to get the demographic information. We want to see your projected number of individuals that you're targeting within the state's targeted populations. We want to see the services that you're providing, the on-the-job and work-based learning components, the related technical instructions, any supportive services. We want to see how you're using grant funding. The bottom line here, right? Are you doing registered apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeships? We want to know what portion of the grants are going to be focused on each of those components. And then, the most importantly, as Pat emphasized, the bottom line outcomes, right? The total number of pre-apprenticeships served under the grant, total number of apprentices served under the grant, and the number of pre-apprentices that successfully transition into registered apprentices. And then on the flip side of attachment 2, these are the capacity building activities, right? So number of businesses engaged, number of sponsors that you support, number of partners in underrepresented areas that you're providing service to, number of outreach events, industry partnerships supported and developed. So part 1, we would anticipate that this section or part 1 would be completed by an intermediary that is running a pilot or demonstration program. Okay? Part 2 would most likely be completed by a navigator. But I would also point out part 2 could probably also be completed by an intermediary, because running a pilot program, they're also working with businesses, and they most likely could be expanding an apprenticeship program as well.
Well, as an intermediary, you'll have to identify the matching funds from the employer, which are, going to be somewhat of a requirement under incumbent workers, so some of that's on there.
Right. Great. And so, Dave, if we can now switch, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through the slide deck because we're running, pretty tight on time now. But I wanted to just show you within the Notice of Funding Opportunity where these key pieces of information are and the requirements. And I'm going to reference most of those as we kind of speed through the slide deck here. We've emphasized, and this is a good summary, the application requirements, those application forms and summary, the technical proposal, resumes, memorandum of understanding, and the budget. The application review information, we emphasize that those key components of the technical proposal directly link back to the application review criteria. The application timeline is outlined there, and September 17th is the application due date, and we anticipate that we'll be in a position to hopefully award grants in December and have project starts by January 1st. That is the goal. Again, this is a slide that outlines those technical pieces with the full application package. So I don't want you to think, as you go to the application website, you'll see a uniform application document. I don't want you to think, oh, all I have to do is submit that and request my grant, 3 or 4 pages with a signature. No. That uniform application, that's just the cover page. That is just the signature page. So, that's your full application are all of the elements that we just went through and discussed. Note that applications are subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. So if you have, potentially anything proprietary or have a valid exception for the Freedom of Information, include that with your submission, and please note that. Questions regarding the grant opportunity can be sent to Pat Campbell at that address, and we'll post those on a frequently asked questions piece of the program website.
Or you can go directly to the FAQ and post your question as I may be out of the office and you may be in wanting to get that, and people have access to the FAQ. So the answer may get answered quicker by going directly to the FAQ.
All right. So for those of you who have applied for other grants, these next couple of slides will be familiar to you because they go over our pre-award requirements, and much of this is dictated to us under the Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, and the purpose of this is to increase accountability for government grant funds, right? It's our primary responsibility is to secure those and to make sure that they're awarded and that they're spent on the intended purpose. And so the GATA is intended to help increase transparency, but then also to help grantees so that the application process and documents are similar between agencies. So the forms that you see the Department of Commerce using should be the same as the forms that the Department of Transportation is using. and those standards that we're using are the same. Many of the requirements are outlined in the actual Notice of Funding Opportunity, and that includes a registration process, pre-qualification process, a risk assessment process, and then submitting disclosures and conflict of interest documents. Under the State Office of Management and Budget, there is a website that coordinates the grant application process for all state grants. And one of the great things about it is that you can actually go to grants.illinois.gov and you can look for the catalog of state financial assistance, and you can identify open grant opportunities. This website and system is also a place where every organization that receives grant funds or other funds from the state of Illinois, they have to register as an entity, and they have to be authenticated and pre-qualified. And so there's a whole formalized process now within the state of Illinois. And understand that it's extensive. There's no doubt about it. There is a lot of new information that is required. But the good thing is that if you complete this information and complete the registration process for this program, that may open up other opportunities for you with other state grants and other applications, right? Because again, it's the same process and requirements, at least on a registration process. So. Grantee registration, so you would go to, if you're a new grantee, you would go to this website and have your financial officer provide the information that's requested. It's key that you have someone who is in kind of authority of your organization provide this requested documentation to the state, because your registration is linked to the web address of those that respond, and so you don't want to have like a grant manager who may be only with the organization for a short period of time, because the state will send periodic reminders for updates. Because once you're registered, you have to keep that registration updated on an annual basis, and that registration can be linked to, or should be linked to, some key staff, executive director, or key fiscal officer. Completing the registration process triggers the pre-qualification verifications, and so the state has a system that bounces back electronically your DUNS number, that you have a SAMS.gov account, that you're in good standing with the Secretary of State, that you're not excluded from receiving a grant from the federal government, and that you're not on the stop payment list. So this is something, as I mentioned, this is something that you do the initial registration, but then the system is constantly checking in the background, and so once you're a grantee, the agency will work with you to make sure if you have an issue, for instance, like your SAMS.gov account, that's something that you have to keep updated with the federal government, and those have an expiration date that have to be updated as well. So, all these things are linked together and can impact your ability, not only as you apply for a grant, but also if you are to receive a grant and work through your project with us. Pre-qualification notification. So once you go through the registration process, there's no issues. You'll get an email back saying you're good, you're qualified. If there are issues, the system will generate an email to tell you what you need to do to address the issues that are identified. most of those issues, I want to step back, most of the issues we can work with you or can at least give you advice on how to address them. You know, as I mentioned, the SAM, you know, how to, you know, connect with them. We don't have the ability to, you know, we don't have any, you know, priority access to these other federal systems, but we can tell you what's the best place to go to for assistance. If your organization is on the federal excluded party list, that's something that we can't fix, or we can't work with you to fix, because that is a hard stop requirement in the federal funding. So once you are registered, the next piece is that you have to complete a risk assessment, and so there's two pieces of a risk assessment, because we want to know, as an organization, you know, are you qualified, are you equipped, do you have the capacity to administer a state grant that is actually federal pass-through money, that has all of these requirements, right? So we want to make sure that you have the ability to run the program, and so the state has standardized how they identify risk, from both the fiscal and administrative components of running a project, and then also the programmatic risks, right? How well equipped are you to actually, you know, implement a program? So the fiscal risk assessment is basically it's like an online question, multiple choice, that again, your executive director or fiscal officer should review and respond to. Any issues that are identified as part of the risk assessment will be, you know, identified for all of the agencies to see, right? And so this fiscal and administrative risk assessment, if you apply to commerce, or if you apply to human services or transportation, we use that same risk assessment. And it's, you know, it's commonly referred to as the internal control questionnaire, is the technical term for it. And so we will, if there are issues identified in the internal control questionnaire, we have to specifically waive that requirement, or we have to include perhaps an additional condition within your grant to help control, quote unquote, for the risk identified. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the grant agreement. There's a programmatic risk assessment, which again is it's basically a separate document that we will send to you, and we will send that to you typically when your project is in the middle of at the negotiation stage. Okay, so you need to have your registration complete. You need to do your fiscal risk assessment, you know, at the point of application. But the programmatic risk assessment we will send to you when we get, you know, to the point of a final funding recommendation. Indirect costs. So this presentation is not intended to go through, you know, the indirect costs. That actually is a whole separate webinar, and we will link some resources to those webinars around indirect costs. But I do want to just highlight some of those requirements. We are required to utilize a uniform budget template that specifically, you know, draws out the indirect cost, or we have to show, you know, the base and the rate that you're using for indirect costs. So these slides are, again, for new entities. You know, part of the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act is that it adopted the federal rules around administering grants. And one of the results of that was that we tightened up on the fiscal management of grants, and specifically around indirect costs. So every entity that is registered as a grantee in Illinois, they have to make an indirect cost selection. And an indirect cost is basically it's a way to identify costs that aren't directly attributed to your program. Some people can call them overhead costs, but again, there's a number of different options that each entity has to choose. Number one, they can use their federal negotiated rate. They can negotiate a rate with the state of Illinois. They could elect to use a 10% de minimis rate. They could use a restricted or special rate. That's not very common. Or they could elect not to use any indirect costs for the grant. We will work with you, especially if you are a new grantee, when we start to negotiate a grant to complete the budget as it relates to indirect costs. But know that we will need to probably request some additional documentation so we can verify how you came to your indirect costs that are requested for the grant. There is a lot of information at the grants.illinois.gov around indirect costs, and I want to leave it kind of at that. We've got several slides that are resources for indirect. Some standard application and grant award documents. We've already walked through the notice of funding opportunity. There is a uniform application for state assistance that I alluded to, and I'll show you in a minute. There's the uniform budget template that we're going to show you, and then there's the notice of state award, which is a new document that basically outlines the amount and the terms and conditions of the grant. So the application is uniform application. This is that cover sheet that we spoke about. It includes some high-level information about the agency and the grant opportunity, and then you complete information about your organization, and then the most important piece of this cover page is that you have somebody sign it. Uniform grant agreement, if you are selected for funding, the award is in a standardized award document that is approximately 35 or 45 pages long, depending on the project scope. It includes all of the standard provisions that you would think would be included in a state or federal grant. And if you have received a state grant in the past, you'll note that most of this language and information is exactly the same, but it may be located in a different piece of the award document. So again, this just gives you an idea. These slides give you an idea of the different topics that are identified in the grant agreement and the terms and conditions. And most of those terms and conditions are non-negotiable because they are the state grant template, and then we also have those federal terms and conditions that the state agrees to and that you as a grantee, our sub-grantee, must agree to as well. The new exhibits, I should say new within the last 2 to 3 years, we've replaced the traditional Part 1 budget with the uniform budget template. We have replaced the Part 3 scope of work with a couple of these exhibits. So again, much of the same information that may have been provided in an old scope of work will be included in these different exhibits. And we'll work with you to develop that grant document, and we will pull a lot of that information out of your executive summary and out of your technical proposal. So that is really, the exhibit is the place where we outline the project plan. I mentioned the grantor-specific terms, so those are terms that the State Department of Commerce includes, and then Part 3, those are the federal terms from the U.S. Department of Labor based on the funding source. These are some additional resources, some additional grantee resources, websites. I know I moved very quickly through these, and the grants.illinois.gov is a great site for the registration and technical issues and indirect issues. We also have some key resources on Illinois workNet, and then obviously the Apprenticeship Plus page. I want to, Dave, if we can move very quickly, I want to show the, see if I can share my screen. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do it here. Let's see. Okay, so hopefully, okay. So this is, and hopefully, and Dave, if you could maybe, can you see right now? You should see the workNet page for the funding opportunity. Can you see that?
Yes, that's it.
Awesome, great. All right, so this is the page that we've been talking about, and the NOFO materials are listed here on the right-hand column, and then those resources, and the FAQ is listed below. I want to spend maybe about 3 or 4 minutes now on the uniform budget template, and so hopefully y'all can see an Excel spreadsheet. Dave, can you see that?
Yes, John.
All right, awesome, thank you. And so you'll see that this is, and you can download this from the website, and this is the uniform budget template that we use for all of our grants. You'll see below here that there are a number of different tabs, okay? And so the first tab is the general instructions, and it's pretty lengthy, but it does give you a clear, or hopefully it's clear, you know, what are the budget line item definitions, okay? What are those allowable costs? Section A here this is a summary of all of the budget line items, okay? So Section A, you'll see these are state of Illinois funds, even though they are all federal funds, okay? But the state is passing them through to you as a grantee, okay? So this is a summary, but note, you're not able to just enter in those costs. See how it took me directly to that personnel tab? And I'll go back, right? So I wanted to enter in my personnel salaries, right? So it won't let me enter directly here because it is linked. This Excel spreadsheet is linked to these other tabs. So right here you'll see 1001 personnel. You will see that there is a corresponding tab here, personnel, that you would have to enter in the information, and then it's linked to that summary page. So I'm just going to put as an example, project manager, and okay. So you'll see, again, just for generic calculation, there's the 50,000, and you'll see that that links back to the front page.
and that is true for all of these budget line items. Okay? One thing I do want to emphasize is that the budget line item definitions are included in the instructions under Section C. There is a portion of each of the line items that are for the state grant funds, and then also a portion for match or other. So see how you have a portion here for state, and then a portion for non-state, and then there is a corresponding narrative for personnel and corresponding narrative for non-state match or leverage. It is key, it's absolutely key that you provide us with enough information within the narrative, even if you have a supplemental Word document that outlines what the activity that you're requesting, or what's the funding, and how are you justifying those costs. It is absolutely key that you include them, include that information in the project, in the budget narrative. And again, I know that it's a very small box here. I think you can expand it, and that would just definitely be a key piece to walk away with. I want to point out also that there are some tricky line items, and it's not meant to trip you up. Training and education. These line items, especially in workforce grants, you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to provide a classroom training to 20 kids or 20 adults, right? That actually should be classified under either direct training or work-based training. Training and education, as you look at the definition, that actually is more for capacity building, so more for your internal staff. So like if you were a community college and you were going to be providing training and capacity building and education internally, that's what you would use there. But if you're providing direct training to participants, you use that direct training tab. And if you're providing work-based training, such as on-the-job training, customized internships, or incumbent worker training, that's where you would classify those costs. I recognize that we've had 5 minutes to talk about this budget, and that it can be very complex. We will go over this in more detail, and we will have, if you are in the mix for negotiation of a grant, we will work definitely more extensively with you on your budget, your final budget for the grant. But again, the key to emphasize is that if you are requesting a cost, make sure that you justify that cost. I don't care about the format, right? So as I said, is an additional Word document that outlines your budget narrative, or expand those boxes that includes in that budget narrative. Your narrative is key to ensure that those costs are justified, because if not, you're leaving a bunch of points on the table. If you look at the qualitative evaluation of your proposal, you can see that cost effectiveness piece is a significant portion of the evaluation. All right, so I think we're just about at the tail end here. We've got about 5 minutes.
Let me make
left.
a comment
Yeah,
here.
go ahead, please.
First of all, we have the bidders conferences coming up. They are going to be, we'll delve into these items in greater detail. We'll have a little bit more time, at least an hour for each section more. And it is really important that if you know partners or you know anyone else that is interested in this, that you encourage them to register for the bidders conference. We'd like to have as many opportunities out there as possible for folks. So if you do know people you're going to partner with or considering, or just other associates that might be interested in this opportunity, please don't hesitate to refer this over and invite them to the Bidders Conference. We will clarify a little bit more what kind of incumbent worker training. OJT is a little tricky with that. We'll talk about that in the Bidders Conference. We don't want you to reinvent the wheel. Please use the resources that we've given you. Too many times we see people submit applications, they haven't reviewed the resources, and they just re-explain things that we've already provided to them. Be very specific in your application. Use historical information, real-life strategies, maybe even from other states, particularly specifics that have worked there and you identify. Please don't ask for funding and then say, give us the money and we will figure it out. That is not the intention of this grant. We're looking for well thought through strategic applications that can clearly identify the use of the funding within those applications. And then again, I want to just, the sustainability issue of this, matching funds and grading funds are really important and need to be calculated in there on how you will elevate this by the use of those additional sources. Sorry, John.
No, it's very good. No, it's great information, and I know that we've got about, I think, 2 minutes left before time here. I know maybe time for a couple of final questions, and I know we can stick around a little bit if there's interest and you want to stick with us. But if you don't have questions, feel free to jump off now, and would say thank you for your time this morning and your interest. But we do maybe have 5 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes for any final questions. And one that I see in the chat pod is, where would we put the outline, or where would we put the non-registered apprenticeship outcomes? And we will be updating Appendix 2, and we will repost that. So it should be included in Appendix 2 is the answer, and we will repost that. Other questions? Okay, Dave, do you see any other questions that we're missing in the chat?
Jump to the right, just for uninterested, there should be a note.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Oh, so our clinicals included in apprenticeships.
They would have to define what you mean by a clinical. That can have several different kind of interpretations, just like internships can have several interpretations. A lot of different things.
Yeah, one thing that I would say, clinical is I think about, that's kind of it's almost like it's a structured work-based learning opportunity, right? And one of the things,
if that's what they're
right, and one of the things that is key, as Pat mentioned, for both registered and non-registered apprenticeship programs is that they have those key elements, right? That they have those 5 elements. I'd refer back to that one graphic that was a big circle, right?
Wages, they're being paid for. That the business is involved in it. That there is a credential at the end of it. That it's a structured on-the-job training, work-based learning, and that there's related classroom training involved.
Right. Yeah, so we would refer you definitely back to this, this graphic here, and that, So whether or not it's a DOL recognized registered apprenticeship or an apprenticeship program, it definitely needs to have those key elements of business involvement, structured on-the-job training, related instruction, skill gain, and at the end of it, you get a credential.
And for the application, you'll need to define what you mean by a clinical, if that's what you're asking. So you need to be very clear, because you don't want the reviewers walking away saying, well, what do they mean by a clinical?
Right. So, let's see. So other entities, I think there was a question around what other entities could be navigators, and I think local education.
Chambers, Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, and so we'll respond to those questions in the FAQs as far as an LEA and an EFE.
But they are identified on one of the slides here.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through some of these other questions I think we responded to. Okay.
Okay, so it's on page 14 of the slide. Who we suggest or who we see as potential navigators is on page 14, the last dot point. That would be Chamber of Commerce, local workforce areas, association, coalitions, service providers, community-based organizations, community colleges, technical colleges, and or other entities.
Okay. I think those are all the general questions. Any other questions? And David, maybe if you can unmute the phones. I don't see any others in the chat pod. I think we got most of those.
Unmuted.
Okay, great. All right. Well, again, thank you all for participating in your interest. Encourage you to attend the in-person sessions for more information. We'll be covering this information, and we'll be going into a deeper dive definitely around the technical aspects. So if you've got some partners that are interested in attending, and especially those on the technical side, we'll definitely have more time to speak to those requirements and answer any technical questions. And then also on the program side, on the design and the model, we'll have more information and more time to discuss and